Hello there, and welcome back to another video. This is the 6th episode of a story about Naruto Uzumaki when he was a mess of opposing fronts and thoughts. He was obnoxious and ignorant, yet bashful and bright. He was always cheerful and smiling, but he sobbed in his room. What will happen when he attracts the attention of Kandi's Uzumaki as well as his two new teammates? Will they be able to decipher Naruto's intricate web of disguises? Wait and see. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel when you've finished watching. Let's begin by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Let's get this party started. Uzumaki left his students, and headed to a close area where he would watch and see how things progressed. The three Jonin were still barely within his field of view, but he was too far away to get any details. Naruto laid out a scroll and a few brushes once he deemed their teacher to be out far enough. I'll go ahead and set up the decoy. He quickly put the seals on the outside of the blank scroll. He let the ink dry before flicking through the hand seals that would lock the scroll, put a barrier around it, and disguise it. Then he moved on to the real one and started laying protective seals and a repelling seal onto it. Shino secured the decoy and then they waited for the real scroll to be finished. Once it was, Naruto hid it inside another scroll that he tucked into his pouch and went on to making the clones. This would be a good test run of them. Yesterday, Shikamaru had suggested they use the clones during some sort of training theirs or their sensei's, to test their uses and long-term durability. Their four-man maneuver would be greatly improved if the new clones worked well. He laid out the kunai and tags, inked the seals then pricked his finger. A small puff of smoke was created with the four clones. Naruto had two hinged into Shikamaru and Shino, while the other two remained as him. One Naruto clone would go with the real team, and the other would go with the hinged clones. The real Naruto would strike out on his own. Shino and Shikamaru would start a few minutes after the clones. The team of clones would act as an initial decoy and trap-setting group, and the real Naruto would be taking a separate route to the drop point. Next, Naruto focused for a long moment, centering his chakra as best he could to sense the area. There are just 4 Anbu out and about. Uzumaki-sensei is out near them. He's closest. The Anbu are making slowish circles in pairs. With their current pattern, you will run into one here. He poked at a spot near the center of the map, and here. That could of course change, but I would say that these are the most likely places. Shino nodded. I see. We will put that into our plan and do our best to adjust as needed. The three shared a weighted look before separating. Naruto headed west, ducking into a thicker copse of trees to start the first part of their mission. He used one of his seals and transformed into one of the other academy students from their class, one of the civilians who had dropped out. He then suppressed his chakra as much as he could. He would still be noticeable to an attentive Jonin or Anbu, but he thought it would be better to be noticeable, but unremarkable rather than try for complete stealth and risk being noticed anyway. Before he continued, he checked on the area one more time. The clones and his teammates were still on the planned paths. The Anbu were also keeping to their pattern of movement. Naruto could feel his senses straining to keep track of the people and the range. He'd have another killer headache after this, like their failed attack on Uzumaki, but he'd have to get used to it. His two teammates and the clones were spreading out now. The clones had the task of collecting some intel as well as laying a trap field. The Shikamaru clone would be writing it all down as they went, so that Naruto would have a copy of it to give to Uzumaki later. The traps were a mix of subtle wire traps with seals, and more obvious or silly ones to throw off the Anbu. Shino and Shikamaru were wandering in a more loose formation, progressing more slowly. They had about 4 miles to cover before they reached the drop point. Naruto was headed around through the left of the others. He leapt off into the trees, half worried, half confident. In his tree, Uzumaki was scowling. He knew the Jonin were studying outside of his training, but seals and shadow clones combined somehow were beyond what he thought was likely for them. Hell, it was far outside of what he thought anyone but perhaps people like Kakashi Hatake, who had a long history of creating jutsu, or the Sannin Jiraiya. This was turning out to be a more delicate situation than he first expected when he began suspecting that his team was doing extra training. There was a point where they could get dangerously in over their heads, and creating jutsu or seals was uncomfortably on that line. Of course it could be a simple trick they found in some old family volume, something of that sort, but Uzumaki couldn't be sure. It was another thing for him to keep an eye on today. He checked on their progress and was pleased to note that Shino had been able to up his speed from the last time the team attempted a drill like this. Shikamaru was unchanged as of yet, but stamina was one of his weak points, so his real test would come later. Regrettably, Naruto was outside of his observation. The blonde was one he wanted to keep an eye on, as the dynamics of the group had him as the central point. As Uzumaki was no censor, and he knew that Naruto was excellent at stealth. He knew it would be better to watch the other two boys rather than spend valuable time searching for the blonde, who may slip past him regardless. Shino kept a close tether on his chakra and his Kikaiku as the group slipped through the trees and underbrush. The insects were spreading out as they went along, forming an early warning system for the Aburame. This was clearly a test, and he was treating it as such for himself as well. He had been working with his father and one of his elderly aunts several times a week, honing his connection with his hive. The increased variety of maneuvers and slightly larger colony were the result of his work. It might not help much against such skilled ninja, but it was better than nothing. The boys used chakra to speed their movements and make them quieter. They were moving at a moderate pace, not fast or slow. The clone Naruto and Shikamaru were noting details as they went, a slight trail through the bushes, or a broken senbone stuck in the bark of a tree. Shino was focusing on chakra and his bugs. Of the three of them, he was the best suited for a direct confrontation should one arise. The Naruto clone should be durable, but they weren't sure of that yet. Shino was resolved to trust his friend's work though. The spar the day before had provided him a learning opportunity. He understood the importance of mortality, and the connection he had with his T. On a mission, that connection would both a great strength and a crippling weakness. This was like a mission, where he would be fighting tougher opponents who wouldn't pull punches. None of them had expected the Jonin to have brushed their changes under the rug. The Anbu involved in this was a clear sign that this was indeed true. This wasn't something he was willing to just go along for the ride, not after this kind of revelation. Ibiki had possibly expected research, drills, or some kind of jutsu that were more diverse and advanced than the ones he had them working on for this. But creating jutsu, forming unique team formations, and obvious stealth skills of various sorts were far more advanced than that. Their goals had all changed as they trained and grew closer to each other, and now the Aburame wanted to push his limits, grow with his team to whatever heights they could. This mission was just a hurdle to gauge their progress. He smiled slightly behind the collar of his jacket. We will grow, how could we not? With our unique set of skills along with our effort, we could surpass the limits of our rank and age. We have already begun. He was looking forward to whatever came with the mission, and beyond. Ibiki was maintaining a distance outside of the range his bug users range, keeping up with the real Shino and Shikamaru. He grimaced when he noted that Naruto had slipped away from him during his ponderings. The other group was still within his limited sensing range though. The blonde boy was surprisingly adept at stealth, although with his past escapades and escapes as a prankster, Ibiki shouldn't have been shocked. The boy as an 8-year-old had outrun Chunin, and even a few Jonin who chased after him after they were victims of a prank. And there were numerous other incidents, many involving higher-ranked shinobi, that were never directly tied to the blonde or anyone else for that matter. Ibiki was fairly sure that they were indeed his handiwork. It might be something for him to look into more deeply, depending on how much he could glean from this exercise. Shino had sent out a small cloud of his Kikaiku in the meantime. The insects were still dispersing as Ibiki watched. He observed the pair plus clone meander around the forest, heading vaguely towards their goal. They were clearly taking the recon part of the mission seriously. He could see Shikamaru adding more and more notes to the scroll he carried. Shino was keeping a close eye on the areas they walked through. The pull on his chakra was tangible, keeping a connection with his hive as spread out as they were. So far, everything was going as it should. To the Aburame, that meant that something would go wrong soon. The trio moved another few yards through the forest and that something became clear. A slight flicker of color and light was their only warning, and it almost wasn't enough. A single Anbu darted at them from above. Shikamaru almost dropped his scroll as he rolled and leapt to the trees with his teammate and the clone. Their formation was tight now, with Shino and Shikamaru back to back, and the clone slightly to one side. Shino called back a large portion of his hive. They had to move quickly, dodging senbone and quick blows from the Anbu. Shino knew that he was at top speed, and they were only just avoiding the attacks, which seemed almost easy to the masked ninja. Shikamaru was reaching out with shadows and occasionally one made contact with the Anbu, only to be broken before the hold could really take. Shino's Kikaiku had started to swarm around the enemy as well, but most were repelled or dodged. The Anbu kept his distance for the most part, making kunai and shuriken the best option without using larger amounts of chakra. Shino threw out a set of shuriken and leapt to the side simultaneously. The nin deflected too and chased after him. The Jonin was forced to use the substitution jutsu twice to escape a sweeping kick and jab that came too quickly for him to parry. Shikamaru tried to launch a shadow onto the enemy again. The Anbu ducked down to a lower branch and flipped a kunai at the boy. It clipped his left leg slightly, making him wince. The clone moved between him and the enemy to draw him away. It was enough for Shino to jump closer as quickly as possible and lead his friend off in a different direction. This isn't working. The Nara boy hissed as they ducked and weaved, running full tilt through the branches. He flicked through a few hand signs. Split, lead, trap, bijutsu. Shino nodded, and without further discussion, the three moved. The clone, which had kept out of the fray as much as possible, now led the movement towards one of the more dense trap clusters that was more or less on the way to the drop point. The clone circled around the other two as they ran, keeping some of the focus off of them. Shino spotted a glint of ninja wire and headed for it. Shikamaru followed. They catalogued the web of snares and tripwires in moments, accustomed to Naruto's trapping styles. As they were running, Shino leapt up and to the side on instinct. A set of 4 kunai landed where he had been standing a split second before. Shikamaru rolled under one of the nearly invisible wires and stayed low. The clone hung back once again. The Anbu, a male wearing a bird mask, went after Shikamaru first. He hit the first trip and set off a subtle seal matrix that would slowly increase the gravity pull on the subject, and start to disrupt their chakra. A second set of traps went off as well. These were more obvious. A flash of light was followed by a barrier that encompassed the trapped area, an 8-meter square that included the ground and sky. The barrier was visible as a bluish-white sheen in the air. After the barrier formed, a puff of smoke filled the space. It contained a mild poison in gas form that attacked the eyes and lungs. It wasn't deadly, but it would likely make its way through the mask that the enemy wore. Naruto knew from past pranks that solids like powders and liquids would be at least somewhat filtered by the bone-white masks, but gas could affect the targets. He designed this trap with Anbu in mind. Shino and Shikamaru were somewhat immune to the poison, all three of the Genin having done several courses of mild exposure to it and other toxins and poisons as part of their independent training. There was a chance that the Anbu was also immune to it, but the combination wasn't lethal, and thus may not be seen as a threat to be dealt with. The Anbu was now more focused on the three Genin, moving more sharply and precisely. A few of the wires strung throughout the trees were cut, disabling some of the traps that were connected. One, however, was set off by the line being cut. A cloud of senbon were launched from every direction a split second after the wire went slack. The first set was followed by 3 more at irregular intervals and from different angles. The first set was avoided, but the second, and parts of the third and fourth made contact. The needles were tipped with different kinds of substances, from a potent paralytic, to a numbing agent and a poison that would speed up the metabolism of the target. The Anbu's ferocity sharpened even more after having blood drawn. He went after Shino then. The Aburame braced and deflected the first attack, quickly snapping out a fist that missed. They went back and forth, Shino dodging and missing, as several of the enemy's attacks found their marks. Shino wasn't exactly expecting to be able to match an elite shinobi as a Genin, but he was finding all his hard work put into taijutsu and speed to be woefully inadequate against his opponent. His breathing was coming faster and faster as he tried to keep up with the man. The muscles in his legs and arms tingled and he could feel a tinge of fear creeping up on him. Shimakaru was still trying to use his clan jutsus to catch the Anbu, with little success. The wound in his leg was throbbing and oozing blood still. It wasn't major, but it was worse than most of the training injuries he had suffered in the past. The clone was keeping up some interference, but Shino was still the primary focus of the Anbu. The Nara heir was spinning through plan after plan, discarding most immediately. He was in the midst of cataloging the traps that were still viable when an earthen wall shot up out of the ground. Shino had escalated his defense to include jutsu. The Anbu hardly reacted to the new defense, breaking down the wall with a chakra-infused kick. Shikamaru cursed viciously and started going through hand signs for a water bullet jutsu. They were losing too much time here, and they weren't likely to win in a battle, even with all their tricks. The best bet would be to trap the Anbu within the sealed area and do their best to hurry along the rest of the training mission. Shikamaru released the pressurized blast of water as close to the fighting pair as he dared. The Anbu turned to dodge and Shino leapt back, sending a small cloud of kikaiku at the man. The poisons that were circulating through the man abruptly took effect. As he jumped, the Anbu failed move as quickly as he had been. The kikaiku struck. The Naruto clone jumped in with a jutsu at the same time, another earth jutsu that created pillars of stone. It wasn't much of a head start, but it gave the Nara time to flash a few hand signs to his teammate. Flee, trap enemy, complete mission. Shino nodded once and made for the edge of the barrier. Shikamaru leapt after him with the clone trailing behind. Shino flashed through a set of hand signs seconds before he would have collided with the sealed barrier, Ram Serpent Tiger Ram. He popped through the blue field with no resistance. Shikamaru and the clone followed on his heels. The three kept up a much faster pace after they got out. Shikamaru still kept up the note-taking, with Shino and the clone keeping a closer eye on things. Shino had called his hive closer, limiting his range as a pseudo-sensor, but increasing his accuracy greatly. The input from the bugs alerted him to the presence of Ibiki-sensei and another Anbu on the fringe of his range. They weren't getting closer, but their presence sent a tingle of apprehension down his spine. He glanced at Shikamaru to check on the brunette. "How bad is the leg?" Shikamaru grimaced and glanced down at his leg. It was still losing blood, but the cut was truly not dangerous at this point. "It hurts like hell, but it isn't really critical. If we ever get a moment, I'll stop and fix it up." "Man, this is turning out to be way more of a challenge than I thought. Logically, this is a good test of our skills in a more realistic situation." Shino huffed out next to him. The Aburame was still out of breath, and there was little chance of them being able to slow down. "I do agree, however, that this is troublesome." Shikamaru laughed slightly at the blunt statement. They ran for nearly 20 minutes that way. Shino would periodically give short summaries of what his hive communicated to him, and Shikamaru would run through a few ideas and keep track of their progress. A few minutes later they hit the small rise that Naruto had pointed out to them. The ground was covered with short, bushy flowers, and the trees taller and broader. Behind the rise, after a short stretch of pines, lay the drop point. It was just as the blonde had described to them. They shared a look and glanced back at the clone, which was still keeping to the rear of their little party. At this point in time, the Tujanon were starting to wonder if their plan to split up was such a good one. It had been an hour, and so far, they hadn't done terribly well with their one confrontation, and it was clear that the other Anbu could have intercepted them at any time. It wasn't a total loss, but it could have been better. It seemed that their skills weren't quite as advanced as they had hoped. And how was Naruto faring with his part? The question ate at the two, and a few signs traded conveyed that. "Naruto, where? Hit? Attack?" Shino shrugged his shoulders, and glanced around. They weren't even talking about anything sensitive. He didn't like how close their teacher and the Anbu were, though within visual range of them, but reasonably, the pair could use their created hand signs with little fear of them being understood. It would take more than the handful they had shown to be able to understand the system. He signed back quickly. No visual, stealth, Chunin level. They both knew that the other boy was better at stealth than most Chunin, but still. With their confrontation, and subsequent flight, the idea of the other boy facing the other two Anbu that he had tagged was worrying. The all-clone decoy team was another blank spot in their plan. Had they been found out? Were they still moving around the forest? If so, how far had they gotten? There were many unknowns at this point. The Nara air was running through so many scenarios at this point, many of which had less than pleasant endings. "I don't think we can maintain this type of strain on missions. There are too many issues that keep coming up when we have done this. It is so different to strategize and analyze theoretically, but the reality is so much harder. There are nuances that I can't factor in yet, and with us not being all together, I have no idea what Naruto is doing. Damn it all." The boy clenched his hands. They were committed, once more, and they were close to being finished. The holes in their training and planning could be amended if they worked this experience into their training. And who knows, it could turn out well after all. He knew that the tide of missions could shift insanely quickly, and they still had a chance to screw it up or keep their moderate success. As they rounded another small copse of closely growing trees, the little shrine came into view. The pair of Genon plus clones stopped and surveyed the area. There was no sign of a skirmish, and there were no visible signs of Anbu presence. Any Shinobi Jonin or stronger would have already sensed them by now, so there was no point in keeping themselves hidden. Shino spread his Kikaiku a bit wider, and then nodded once to his friend. The clone went first, bouncing across the more open ground quickly to run a complete circle around the faded red structure. The clone gave a thumbs up and the other two came closer. Shikamaru noted more of the faint signs of past movement in the trees and earth, but none of it looked any newer than the signs they'd found throughout the forest so far. There was no blood, no large broken branches, or patches of leaves that were disturbed. All seemed Aburame pulled his insects close to his body, creating a low agitated buzz that was barely audible. His hive was beginning to make an impact on his chakra supply, accompanied by the amount he'd used in their fight and then retreat. The other boy was also beginning to feel the exertion, as well as his wound, more acutely. Shikamaru, by virtue of having better chakra control, was the one who carefully poked at the tiny door of the shrine. He brushed it with just the barest hint of chakra. Nothing. The old wood was as dead as it could be. He squinted at the hinges and the notch to open it. "I don't see anything." Oh, wait. A single fleck of color caught his eye. Inside the shrine, barely visible through the lattice on the sides, was a scroll, paper a pale tan and dark wooden spindle. It looked like any generic Konoha scroll. There is a scroll inside. I can't tell if it is ours or a planted one. Shino, who was standing with his back to the other boy, keeping a sharp eye on the trees around them, grunted. He was feeling a coldness creep in on his body, a sure sign that his energy was about spent. What do you want to do? Shikamaru shifted closer to the structure. He ran his hands slowly over the outside, trying to get any other hint of what could lay in wait if he opened the door. He shuffled around it, with Shino and the clone turning as he did. Finally, after he'd gone nearly 2/3 of the way around, he found something. There is a seal on the inside wall. I can see the paper. It is primed, but not active. In the trees around the shrine, Ibiki and the Anbu who'd kept close to the trio were still watching. They were within hearing range now, with Shino being unable, or unwilling to keep up his wider warning range. The Anbu was amused with the three Jinan. She found their efforts cute, having little to no gauge of what should be appropriate for children their age after being Anbu for years. Ibiki, on the other hand, was again wondering how the hell his three students could have progressed to this extent without him seeing it in their training with him. Shikamaru's comment about the seal shocked him. It was one thing to set off a seal, and an entirely different one to visually be able to assess one like he had just done. It had been Naruto that had used and drawn out the seals they'd used to prepare their mission, so he had assumed it to be the blonde boy's proficiency. It would take quite a substantial amount of exposure to the art at a high level for it to rub off on a teammate like it appeared had happened here. That there was a seal inside the shrine also meant that their teammate had made it past the other Anbu and their group at some point, as none of the Anbu assigned to this drill had any skill with the art. This is turning out to be most enlightening. The Jonin muttered. I'm going to open the door, be ready. Shino frowned, but didn't stop the other boy. They both knew how dangerous seals could be, what with watching Naruto experiment with his creations. Neither one of them had the energy or ability to attempt to figure out if the seal was dangerous at this point though. They were both aware of the two ninja perched in the trees a few scant meters away. Shikamaru took a breath and eased the door open. A small spark of light and chakra had him flinching back out of instinct. Before he could call a warning, a barrier sprang up around them. It was easily recognizable as one of Naruto's, nearly identical to the one they had used against their Anbu attacker. The two boys shared a relieved look and Shino joined his friend on the ground, sitting with his back against the small shrine. Well, this wasn't a total disaster. It's gonna be such a drag to improve our planning and mission strategies though. Shino called his hive back, watching as the stragglers trickled in through the barrier. I agree. Logically, our plans have been good, but in practice, there is much room for growth. Why? Because we continue to discover flaws and weaknesses. Ibiki and the Anbu dropped down from the trees and made their way closer. The Anbu woman was cackling behind her mask. Cute. Can I play with the little deers, Captain? It would be such fun to teach them about how to field interrogate. I could show them all my tricks for no, I think this will be enough to a while. You are dismissed, gather your team as you go. Make sure to treat any poisons. The woman seemed to deflate. Yes sir. It would be so much fun though. I could break them, then teach them all about running an anti-no. Ibiki turned and glared, a hint of his dark aura coming out. The Anbu saluted and leapt off into the forest. Ibiki turned to examine his students. The clone was standing behind them, while the two Jinan were warily looking up at him. Ibiki tapped the barrier with a finger, finding it to be a tangible construct. He would go with the flow on this, and not call them out on anything this time. They had showed him some of their skills without much hesitation, so perhaps trust was building. He would affirm their success, then instruct them on the places he saw a need for improvement. Last time, Ibiki tapped the barrier with a finger, finding it to be a tangible construct. He would go with the flow on this, and not call them out on anything this time. They had showed him some of their skills without much hesitation, so perhaps trust was building. He would affirm their success, then instruct them on the places he saw a need for improvement. You two have done well. Shino stared up at him silently. Shikamaru sighed and leaned back, rubbing at his bleeding leg. Are you able to take down the barrier? That wound needs to be treated, and we will need Naruto to join us. The words were hardly out of his mouth when the boy in question dropped from the trees behind his team and approached. He was limping slightly, and his clothes were damaged. Ibiki frowned at him. Shikamaru had a mirror expression. I'll take it down. He offered before Shino or Shikamaru could say anything. A quick hand seal, and the barrier was down. Ibiki knelt down by the Nara and started to peel back the bloody fabric. This will need to be cleaned and bandaged. There is no poison, and no stitches needed. Naruto, come here. The blonde boy grimaced and walked around the shrine. Ibiki counted it as a win. He was approaching voluntarily. The last time he'd been hurt, Hyde had resisted any treatment. He must trust the Jonin more than previously, which was a good sign. There was a cut on his forehead, a scrape, clearly from taijutsu, on his left arm, and his right and left legs were banged up. There were cuts, and several forming bruises. The boy didn't flinch, but he was holding himself stiffly. All three of you will be doing a debrief as soon as we get back to the training area. For now, get up and get moving. The boys did so with no comment. It was part of their routine that Ibiki had set up early on. If the Jonin sensei coddled the Jonin team under their instruction, what good was the teaching? At first, the three boys had been a bit bitter about the harshness of their training and the lack of time to recover, but after a few weeks of it, they had all started to see the benefits. They were learning to push through pain and exhaustion and function on sore muscles and worn-out chakra reserves. As this moment, they were also a bit preoccupied with each other. Naruto kept shooting glances at the other two, and they were taking stock of him as well. They would hold their own meeting back at the base once this was over, or possibly in the morning. If their sensei took them to the hospital, they would be expected back at home. That would make it nearly impossible for them to leave and meet up. Past experience with returning home had made that clear. Neither the Aburame nor Nara were particularly interested in babying their heirs, but they were concerned with them recovering from training. On the plus side, if one or the other could convince Naruto to go with them, the blonde boy would also get to be subtly fussed over. Heaven knew the quiet boy needed it. As the team made their way back through the woods to the village, they passed through a portion of the forest that was torn up. There were trees sporting broken limbs, gashes in the bark. The ground was littered with impact marks and scorch marks. There was mud and broken-up remains of earth walls littered around as well. Ibiki raised an eyebrow at the now grinning blonde. Shino let loose a low whistle. I take it you encountered one or more of the Abnu? Naruto just shrugged. I like pranks still. It was fun to mess around with combining the jutsu I know. Ibiki thought this was a bit more than combining jutsu, and that encountering one or more Anbu should not be considered a time to experiment and play pranks. Nevertheless, it was good to see some humor in the usually quiet and reserved boy. The Jonin couldn't forget the terrified child that he, Inoiki, and Shikaku had encountered during the graduation exam. Sensei, will this type of thing become a regular part of our training? Shino quietly inquired. He was feeling bruises forming now that the adrenaline rush was ending. Ibiki gave him a sidelong look. I do think it could help our team. Perhaps next time I will also participate. None of you have had direct experience with working under a higher-ranked ninja in the field. It would be beneficial for us to start venturing into C-rank missions and more direct team training. Shino nodded behind the high collar of his jacket, and pondered this. He could understand the logic behind needing more training, but he wasn't exactly looking forwards to more stress, failure, or injury. The party was quiet until they reached their usual spot. Ibiki sat them down on the fallen logs that had become their favored seats. Mission report, he demanded in a clipped tone. He glanced at Naruto first. Naruto shifted slightly and deferred to Shikamaru. The Nara blinked back a wince as his leg throbbed. The mission was a success. Team Ibiki split into two groups, a decoy and real unit. The unit further split. A single man split and carried the cargo to the drop successfully. The unit continued with the recon portion of the mission. Here are the details gathered. He handed over the scroll and continued. There were signs of past and recent movement, but only one physical encounter. An Anbu-level shinobi was encountered and engaged with the unit. The unit attempted to skirmish, failed, lead Anbu to a pre-placed trap matrix and re-engaged there. The skirmish was a clear loss, the unit cut and ran, leaving the Anbu at least temporarily detained. Minor injuries were sustained. The unit proceeded at a high speed to the drop site, confirmed success of drop, and completed the recon portion of the mission. End of report. Ibiki said nothing. Naruto spoke up more quietly and slowly. As stated, the unit split. I took the cargo through an alternate route. I encountered two Anbu at the halfway point. I engaged. Jutsu, Daijutsu, and Kenjutsu were utilized. I sustained small injuries, and inflicted some minor injuries on the enemy. The Anbu were not defeated, but they retreated after a certain point. I proceeded to dodge and lose them after they attempted to pursue at a distance. I laid out a false trail, then continued to the drop point. There were no other encounters. I trapped the drop site and retreated to conduct recon and assess the area. He was still obviously less comfortable talking to the Jonin, but the whole report was fairly well done. Ibiki considered the three boys for a moment, putting both sides of the mission together in his mind. He would have them write out complete reports later, and he would be getting the other side from his Anbu as well. On the whole, I believe you all did well. You planned out a mission, including multiple variations in that planning. You took a multifaceted goal and broke it down. There were measures taken to lead away the enemy from you, as well as preparation for fighting them. It was a good effort for a team that is as young as you are. Ibiki wasn't telling them that it was far above what the other Jonin were doing with their Junon. He suspected that they would find out at some point, if they didn't already know. Even if they knew that he was more strict and advanced, they might not know the extent of that. For now, though, it would be best to keep them going at their current pace. If they knew just how far he had pushed them, it could change how they grew. It was also never a good idea to implant the idea of complacency into a ninja. He had seen far too many good men and women make fatal mistakes because they were overconfident. Now, we are going to the hospital for a full check of all of you, and then you need to go home and rest. Tomorrow, we will do some light training, and then prepare for our first C rank. Naruto grimaced at the thought of the sterile white halls, but he knew better than to argue. Shino was also shooting him glances, and if he was correct, the bug user would be dragging him back to his family home after they had gotten out of the hospital. The Jonin ushered his charges through the training grounds, and the village to the hospital. The intimidating aura he projected was enough to cow the nurses into putting all three boys in one room, and the doctor not his first choice into quickly examining and treating the boys. Shikamaru only had the one large cut, and it was easily cleaned and closed with jutsu. Shino had only minor injuries, and low levels of chakra. He had a few bandages, and nothing more. Naruto had several cuts, and a burn that had to be treated with jutsu, and one of his shoulders showed signs of partial dislocation. Ibiki scowled at that. He would bet good money that the boy had actually fully dislocated the joint, and just popped it back in during his fight. The Jonin had noticed how quickly the blonde could recover from injuries. It was a possible side effect of his status as a Jinchuriki, but the Jonin wasn't positive. Due to the secrecy around the blonde boy's cargo, he also couldn't ask about it without drawing attention. The other injuries, a set of deep scrapes to both legs and ankles, were easier to fix. Throughout the process, Naruto hardly reacted again. Both Shino and Shikamaru had flinched and then shown relief during their turn under the green healing jutsu. Naruto did not react. It bothered the Jonin, but he had to remind himself that the boy, really all three of them, had grown and changed quite a bit in the 2 months that he had been teaching them. The Jonin took stock of them after the grumbling doctor shuffled out. Shikamaru looked exhausted. Both other boys showed it less, but he could tell that they were also ready for the day to end. The tension in their shoulders, and the way the eyes tracked around the room in patterns, seeking movement or threats belied the calmness they portrayed. Very few shinobi could stand being in the hospital. Ibiki could empathize. He hated being here just as much as the boys did. And right now, they were worn out. Go home, get some rest. Tomorrow we will start prepping. He ushered them out of the hospital and watched for a moment to make sure that they were heading away from the training grounds. The Jonin then took off to Anbu headquarters to get a debrief from the team he's had out with them. He was interested to see how the two compared. After Ibiki left them, the three boys started to separate. Shino grabbed Naruto's sleeve before the blonde had gotten more than a step away from him and pulled him towards the path that would eventually lead to the Aburame land. The bug user started to talk quickly. Naruto cut him off. I know what you are gonna say. I got the memo the first time. He grumbled. The first time Naruto had tried to just go home and lick his wounds, it had caused a huge argument between the three of them. The blonde might not like being taken care of, because of the discomfort the attention caused. Oh, he enjoyed being with his friends and being safe and cared for. But the focus being on him and feeling like he was taking advantage of Shino or Shikamaru's parents wasn't good. It had taken the others almost an hour or logic, arguments, and guilting to get the blonde boy to accept the offer. Naruto had no desire to repeat that experience, and he was starting to learn that when his team offered him something, they really truly meant well. It wasn't a sign of pity, or some kind of trick. They wouldn't be changing their minds either. Iruka-sensei's help when he graduated, and all the time spent so closely with the two boys had made a huge difference. He was still working on the suspicion and instinct to pull away from others, though. By now it was something of a habit to be dragged off to one or the other's homes if he had any injuries that they considered too much for him to just let them be. Naruto still protested at times, but he mostly went along with the whims of his teammates. Shika, Can you meet at the base early tomorrow? Or would it be better to wait? Naruto glanced over his shoulder at the other boy as Shino pulled on him. The Nara sighed and shrugged. That should be fine. I don't know for sure though. Dad has been paying more attention to me lately. I think he suspects that something is off with us. He hasn't said anything, but you know. The other two stopped. Yeah, that might be hard then. I think before training should work. Ibiki-sensei said we would have an easy day. Shikamaru stretched slightly as he spoke, feeling the effects of their trial mission. I do think we should take a little bit of a break today. Naruto blinked widely shrugged. I might still work on my research and development. I get that you two are tired through. Shino huffed. Not everyone can have your stamina. Why? Because bloodlines and other factors do you so many favors that are not afforded to others. Naruto grimaced slightly at the mention of other factors. Yeah. I guess. Let's go. I can get being smothered over with faster then. The other two boys snickered at his expense, but dispersed nonetheless. The Aburame clan lands were calm and quiet. Naruto appreciated that about both his friends' homes. There was none of the loud bustle that encompassed the rest of the village. The lightly forested area was quite relaxing to him. The pair walked in silence, both unwinding from their mission. When they reached his home, the brunette slipped off his sandals at the porch and stepped up onto the raised walkway. Naruto followed closely. They went around the house to the kitchen entrance. Shino blinked when his mother greeted him. He hadn't been expecting her to be home at this point. Naruto bowed slightly to the woman. Hello, thank you for your hospitality. The woman blinked and nodded at him. It is nothing to thank me for. Why? Because you are always welcome here. The blonde knew that, but he still wanted Shino and his family to know that he was grateful for their kindness. After a short conversation where she tutted over how dirty they both were, the boys were safe to continue on to the rest of the house. Shino ducked into his bedroom, and Naruto slipped into the guest room beside it. There was an extra set of clothes, just a plain yukata and such, that Naruto had been given in the back of the closet. He grabbed it and ducked into the attached bathroom to clean up. 10 minutes later, he knocked on Shino's door, and poked his head in. I'm done, are we doing anything or just whatever? Shino looked up from drying his hair. I thought some time out in the garden might be good. I insist that you leave the theory work out of it for a while. Logically, we need time to rest, physically and mentally. Your research and theories are not restful. Naruto huffed and rolled his eyes. He enjoyed the research, but it was often frustrating when the pieces didn't work together like he expected. He also had trouble resisting trying the new versions of his seals. Yeah, I guess you were right. I can take a few hours off. They wandered downstairs and out into a small fenced garden. There were a few decorative trees with deep red leaves that had soft moss growing under them. This was usually where they would sit, partially obscured from view. Today, Naruto flopped onto his back and stared up at the branches. Do you think we are ready for C ranks? He asked quietly. Shino hummed. I don't know. I would like to think that we are more than prepared for such ventures. We have gone up against Jonin and Anbu in training, and our own personal developments are rather advanced. That said, we have not faced true opponents, those who actually mean to harm us. There are also more uncontrolled variables out on missions that cannot be accounted for in planning. It will be different, I think. Naruto folded his hands under his head, a typical Shikamaru pose. Yeah. I get the feeling that we will be both prepared, and not. All of our experiments and such have been fairly contained and sheltered. Even today, I doubt the Anbu were really trying as hard as they could, what with 2 clan heirs running around with the QB container. How much could they really have gotten away with? Shino shrugged non-committally. Naruto blinked back and settled in for the long haul. 4 o'clock in the morning found the 3 boys sitting in their base, at the small round table Naruto had found who knows where. Each boy had a cup of hot herbal tea, again Naruto's contribution. So, we need to debrief, and come up with new ideas for training. The blonde boy announced. Indeed. I would like to know what happened on your side yesterday before we meet with Ibiki-sensei again. Shino pinned him with a look. Yeah, that might be good. I went on our planned route, and I could sense them before I encountered them. We met just before the halfway point. I used the clone jutsu, the normal shadow one, and sent the clones at them. I started off with just taijutsu, and that quickly failed, so I moved to taijutsu and ninjutsu combined. I use low-level earth jutsu and water jutsu mostly, those won't raise too many eyebrows. Lots of Jonin learn those jutsu, just not usually so early. He rubbed at his left shoulder. One of the Anbu got too close and started a takedown. I popped my shoulder out of joint getting out of it. I decided I needed to move to more serious stuff to get away from it all. I wasn't going to pull out all my cards, so I did some knife kanjutsu, which I think took them off guard. I had to use more jutsu, some chunin level 1s as well. I got enough space and time to slip a sturdy clone in my place and get out to the drop. I kept up as much stealth as I could with injuries and trapped the drop. Afterwards, I started a loose circle of the area. I sensed you two coming, and started back toward you. I took my time to make sure there was no one else around, and then you know the rest. Shikamaru hummed. We might have to mitigate the jutsu you used, but it shouldn't be an issue. Ibiki knows that we train independently of him. We can cover like you started, with pranking and experimenting. As long as we don't overdo it, he shouldn't push back too much. I do think it might be a good idea to lay low on the new stuff for a while now. Naruto sipped at his tea, thinking hard. I don't know what to expect from a C-rank mission. What do you two know about them? Generally, Shikamaru started. They are simple things like escort mission, info drops, or courier runs. The most conflict that is expected from them is bandits or thugs. Ninja encounters are supposed to be quite rare. However, there is a reputation of C ranks suddenly escalating. It doesn't happen often, but every once in a while, Jinan or new Chunin cells will encounter B or A rank enemy ninja, or a team of samurai or something of the like. Dad talks about it sometimes with my mom. There aren't any patterns, or common factors to link the incidents. They happen completely at random. Occasionally, there is a situation that the Hokage is aware of the intersex with the C ranks, but those are rare. Shino took up the explanation next. From what I have learned from cousins, there are usually enemy nin who are encountered by the Jinan team. Keisuke and his team encountered 4 Chunin or Jonin from Iwa on their first mission outside of the village, and one of his teammates was critically injured. They encountered them on the return trip, and barely made it back in time to save the one injured Jinan. Naruto tapped at the side of his tea cup, deep in thought. We can't really be prepared then, can we? I mean, we are aware of the possibility of something going very wrong, but that is about the most we can do. Without real experience, or knowledge of outside missions like this, we can't make a full plan with contingencies. True, the best we can do is look at what records we have access to and base some ideal and partials on those. Ibiki-sensei might have something to add later today, but I don't know what that might entail. Shikamaru commented. He was honestly a mix of worry and anticipation. Despite, or perhaps because of his formerly lazy attitude, the brunette was looking forward to testing his and his teammates' progress. Their attempts to do so within the village had been mixed, with one clear failure full of flaws, but the last attempt had gone over well. They had maintained partial secrecy from their teacher, an intelligence specialist no less. They were all learning and progressing at a rapid rate. This C rank would be a real test of their skill. If it ended badly, though, Shikamaru had the feeling that it would be very bad. With the way their team seemed to do things, nothing was ever a small matter. Look into your strange teammates' past only to find an unknown connection to 2 of the most renowned shinobi of their time, one of which was the legendary 4th Hokage. Then, as they were looking into this, they were informed that said teammate is also a chakra beast containing miracle of sealing genes. Extra training had quickly spiraled into the 3 of them delving into experimental jutsu, and more advanced techniques. Shino was growing his colony at a fast rate, developing skills that hadn't been seen in an Aburame for several decades. Shikamaru had worked up his own variations on shadow jutsu, including one that allowed him to pass through some walls. They had passed through the Jinan level jutsu and taijutsu kata within a month of training rather than the expected 5 to 7 months. No, if something happened, it would be spectacularly bad. Maru? Are you listening? No. He's not. Shino, don't laugh. He became aware of chuckling in Naruto's irritated huff. I was being serious. If anything happens, I'll make a butt-ton of clones, and we can try to get out of it back to the village. I wasn't being that boring. Shikamaru cracked a smile. Sorry. I was just thinking about something. We should start working on some team extractions just in case though. They might need to be more complex than just spam clones though. Naruto grimaced playfully back at him, not truly bothered by his friend's lapse in attention. Yeah, I just know how few people really expect pure brute force and a lack of tactics. It is part of why some of my pranks worked out. When you mix the two, people don't react to both. One or the other is what is noticed, and the other part ends up catching them. Shino leaned forward and steepled his fingers. Yes, we saw some of that with our first attempt with Ibiki-sensei. But, out in the field, we will need to have this more balanced and set up. We have to all be on the same page for something like that to function. I will see what I can find in the archives, and then we can go over the reports and run possible scenarios and maneuvers. But we need to head out, or Ibiki will come looking for us. It's almost 5. Naruto swore and gathered up the dishes. Okay, you two head out. I'll be a minute. The two clan heirs took off from the base carefully. Shikamaru used a subtle shadow jutsu to blend in with the shadows of the trees until he was well away from the base. He then took off at a fast walk towards the training fields. Shino turned to the left of Shikamaru and walked to a path that led from the shopping district to the training grounds. His route was more direct than the Nara's, and they would intersect each other about halfway to the fields. This was their habit, as their respective houses lay roughly in the directions they would now be coming from. Naruto would probably use the treetops and his sneaking skills to get to their meeting place, and just drop out of the branches. This was how Ibiki encountered them. It was their routine by now, and he knew to expect the two brunette boys to be walking together, talking quietly, and for Naruto to be announced by a slight rustle in the trees before dropping down beside the other two. The Jonin waited until they were in their clearing to start in on the instructions. Today, we will be going over procedures for missions that take place outside of the village and preparing for our first C rank. The three boys took seats around their teacher. When we are out in the field, things are quite different than they are around here. On D ranks, there is usually a single simple task that is set as the mission. There are simple instructions for each party, and a clear task to be completed. I assign subtasks, or allow you to divide them based on preference or skills. That is the bare-bones simplified idea of all missions. C ranks and higher priority missions are much more serious and complex. The most important action you can take is to follow orders. I am your direct commanding officer out in the field. If I say to guard the rear of a caravan, you guard the rear. If I say you need to keep up watch shifts, you take the ones you are given. I say do not engage, or run, you do it. No questions asked, no hesitation. There are situations that arise on outside missions that require you to follow through with orders even, or perhaps especially when you don't understand them. He leveled them all with a hard, flat stare that showed off his position as head of Tandi. It was reminiscent of when they had their first team meeting. You all have more skills than many of the Junon out in the field, but that in no way means that you can handle any of the situations that occur. There is no replacement for experience. Out on the field, there should be no argument, no goofing around, no experiments. He shot a look at Naruto here. He didn't expect much trouble from them, but there was no such thing as being too well prepared. Procedures also include safely handling mission-related information and documents. Depending on the nature of the mission, there is to be no open discussion of the mission or its parameters outside of the village. Treat this and all other missions with the same care you would a top-secret SS assignment. All three boys looked slightly cowed as the Jonin finished. Ibiki pulled out 3 packets from a pack that rested at his feet. "Sensei." Shikamaru started. Ibiki paused and looked over at the boy. "I was concerned about the time frame of C ranks. When I was looking over some records, it listed long-term stakeout missions as C or B ranks. How are the missions graded and distributed?" Ibiki wasn't surprised that the boy had looked up information and data such as this. With all the extra studying the three of them apparently did, he half expected them to just randomly know details that were above their pay grade. That features in this. He tapped the brown docket cover he was holding. This is the official protocol and regulations pertaining to C-rank missions. It goes through the chain of command, critical failure procedures, general guidelines, and the grading within the mission level. Read them, memorize the highlighted pages. We'll be running some tests and practices this morning, and then this afternoon we will be going through how to do mission prep. Tomorrow morning, we will go to the tower, and pull a C-rank mission. He stood, his long black coat rustling ominously in the stillness. He strode away without waiting for his students to respond. "Damn, this is serious," Shikamaru thought as he flipped through the first few pages of his packet. He knew that Ibiki treated the whole command and focused on missions much more seriously than other shinobi. He'd heard snippets of both his father and Ino talking about what went on during missions enough to realize this. The way their Jonin sensei laid it out though, was more like his talks of village security and Tandi protocol than he'd expected. The Nara buckled down to commit the packet to memory. Less than an hour later, they were starting the practice runs Ibiki had mentioned. "You'll be guarding this scroll, and fleeing through the forest. No jutsu is to be used, stealth is paramount. If I catch you, you are to destroy the scroll before I get to you." Ibiki tossed Shino the scroll, and then immediately started to throw kunai at them. The three boys had to scramble away with no chance to talk over a strategy or work out who was even going to carry the scroll. Ibiki went slow for less than a minute before he was going after them for real. The Janana only lasted 5 minutes before Shikamaru tossed Shino, who hadn't had a chance to do anything with the scroll but held on as tightly as he dared, a lit fire starter seconds before Ibiki took down Naruto, who was the rear guard. Shikamaru and Shino were down seconds later. Ibiki stood over the 3 panting boys and nodded once. Acceptable. Next time, make sure whomever has it can also get rid of it. He gave them a moment to stand and brush off the leaves and twigs from their clothes and then launched into another drill. This time, Naruto will be incapacitated. Shino and Shikamaru will be extracting him from the area. You are to retaliate only as much as necessary to escape. Go. He barked and stood while the 3 boys once again scrambled to move away from him. This time, they lasted around 7 minutes, and had made it 2/3 of the way back to the edge of their training field. Ibiki paused to give a few sharp critiques before setting them on another scenario. This lasted for over 2 hours, with 15 different setups. By that time, all 3 boys, even Naruto, were drenched with sweat and covered in scratches and bruises. Then the Jonin had them all sit down for a break, going over what was done well, and what they needed to change in each scenario. The rest of the morning was spent going through similar setups, with Ibiki now included. He had them cover different types of missions, such as escort with a clone playing the part of the client, drop missions, scouting or reconnaissance missions, and more. Their sensei pushed them hard, critiquing ruthlessly. They stopped for a short lunch break, and then moved on. Ibiki laid out meat-sized packs and a large tub of supplies. I want you to each put together a kit. He watched them go through the gear, curious to see what they would choose. Naruto started pulling out camping gear and sorting it while Shino went through foodstuffs. Shikamaru was checking through the packs and estimating the amount of space available. Naruto had found 3 individual tents, 4 insulating heat-reflective blankets, waterproof matches, compasses. He gathered them into sets of 3 and then kept digging. Shino hummed as he set out a bottle of soldier pills, a pack of nutrient bars and iodine tablets. He also had a selection of different types of flasks and canteens gathered. There were a few collapsible dish sets and a folding shovel in the steadily growing stack as well. Shikamaru sat in between the 2 of them and started vetoing various pieces. That one is too heavy. Let's wait on that tent. Naruto, can you find a small 3-man one? The blonde dug through the tub. Ah. Here is one that looks bigger, I'd have to set it up to tell. Shino put down his handful of dried foods. I'll set it up. Did you find any sleeping bags or pallets? Naruto shrugged. Not yet. Here, I will see if there are any. Shikamaru had started to fill the smaller pouches up already. He was carefully weighing each item, and gauging its usefulness. Ibiki watched them work. They worked together very well. No discussion of who needed to do what, no argument. That is a good sign. Cultivated with experience, that will help missions move more smoothly. He let them get the packs halfway loaded before stepping in. Naruto, try putting on that one. He interrupted their discussion of which tent would be better. The blonde shrugged and hefted the pack up. It was heavy, but he could easily carry it. He looked questioningly at the Jonin. Now handed over to Shikamaru. The Nara stood up and grabbed the shoulder strap that Naruto handed him. The other boy had to readjust it twice before he got it on and buckled properly. See the difference? Shino nodded with the other 2. Shikamaru and Naruto have a different capacity. We will need to account for that when putting together packs. Yes, the man replied. Each of you will have different capacities for carry weight. Just because you can lift the pack does not mean you could carry it for days or weeks on a mission. Think about the long-term needs of the mission. Just because you expect to only be gone for 3 days in no way mean that will be what happens. Also, the type of mission is important. Are you going stealth, or will it be an open mission? That changes what you can and should bring. You can't always take things that would make the trip easier, like dishes, or tents. Yes, those may not take up a huge amount of room, and yes, they may make the mission easier. But there are times when lightness trumps, or when you need to play off your identities as ninja. He could see the gears turning in all 3 boys' heads, trying to evaluate their ideas. Ibiki sat on the other side. For most missions, if you have the time, it is best to pack after receiving a mission's assignment. Evaluate where you are going, and the scope of the mission. Adjust your supplies accordingly. Keeping a basic pack set up for urgent missions is also necessary, but it is always better to tailor to the individual mission, especially while you are new. The boys were nodding and glancing through the collected gear. Ibiki pulled one of the packs closer and opened it. He appended it. For a general rule, you only need to have a few things with you for a mission to be successful. You need nutrients, So bars or pure supplement pills. He selected 2 bottles and 1 smaller package and stuck them in the pack. You need a reflective blanket, iodine and a canteen, and a few extra weapons. He swept up the mentioned items and deposited them. All the rest are optional. The pack was handed back to Shikamaru. Try that on now. The boy stood and put it on. Okay, yeah. That is so much lighter. Ibiki watched him run through a short kata set. You just hit on the other issue with missions and supplies. If you can't run, jump and do any and every kata or jutsu with your pack on, you will likely not make it through the mission. That struck a chord with them all. Naruto started ticking off medal points on his fingers while Shino started to resort his pile. Shikamaru sat back down and took off the pack. So, sensei, when is it appropriate to take more with you? I know my parents take tents and such at times. Shino asked as he held up the tightly folded 3-man tent from his pack. Ibiki sat back and pulled his long coat tighter around himself. For most C ranks, it is acceptable to take a small single-man tent, or a larger 3-man one. A dish set is really not needed. Yes, you can make some more substantial food if you have dishes, but plain meat, any raw plants, nuts, or berries you can forage work just as well. If you have a small amount of dried meats or fruits, that can act as a supplement for fresh, but again, not a necessity. Naruto looked up from repacking with a question. What about distributing supplies between teammates? I mean, different people can carry different weights, and that way you might be able to have more stuff with you. Ibiki appreciated the question, both the thought that went into it, and the fact that the boy was asking it. Again, he found himself appreciating the progress of his students. That is a possibility, but it comes with risks. Ideas? He raised one eyebrow. Shino was the first to answer. If you are separated, or you lose a teammate, you may lose necessary equipment, or have to attempt to distribute weight that is not easily carried. Logically, both options are likely to cause major issues. Exactly. Those are the main issues with that idea. Other things to consider are more complex missions. If you have a 3-man cell with an undercover post, the undercover member will need very different equipment than the other 2. If you are running a recon interrogation mission, there will be specific items that you need that are not on the normal list of supplies. If you are already adding to your packs, having issues with weight or access to equipment hampers your progress. There was a moment of contemplation before Shikamaru piped up. What if you had to share weight, like if a teammate is injured, or you have to retrieve something for the mission? Those are things you take in stride. Always pack as light as you can, so that if something like that occurs, you can deal with it. If all else fails, you leave anything you have to complete the mission and get everyone out alive. He gave the boys a hard look. Never prioritize weapons or such over your mission, and your team. Naruto shot a look at the other 2. They all had the same look of determination. Yes sir. The blonde murmured. Like hell he would let anything happen to his best only friends. Ibiki held his gaze for a moment before standing up. Good. You have worked hard today. Finish those packs, then I have another point to discuss before we go to the tower and pick up a mission. After that I want you to rest for the afternoon, and meet at the main gates at 5 tomorrow morning. The 3 boys, still worn out and sore, were relieved. Ibiki kept an eye on what went into the packs, but had no more comments on that front. What I wanted to discuss with you is a more advanced topic that I believe will apply to our team particularly. With our specialization, cultivating a persona can be very beneficial for Tiny, and for reconnaissance and undercover missions. What do you mean by cultivating? Naruto asked. Have you ever heard of the Hound? The Jonin posed the question mostly to the 2 clan heirs. Shino shook his head, but Shikamaru was thinking. I know the Hound in Ananbu, and has a highly respected reputation. Naruto bit his lip. I think. Hound might be, Backing up, I had stuff show up in my apartment from time to time, and I found that it is likely the Hound who was helping me. Ibiki smirked slightly. So, if I told you that the Hound is in every bingo book in every nation, and has the highest S&SS ranked mission completion status of any shinobi in Konoha, how would that make you think about him? That is quite impressive. I would expect there to be a very good reason for Hound being in every bingo book, and I would have the utmost respect for him, Shino murmured. Ibiki nodded. That is how most of Konoha see the Hound. We are on the same side, so the feeling of respect or admiration is most common. However, to an enemy, the Hound is a ghost, a thing to be feared. Most enemy nin will flee on sight if they encounter the Hound. Now, think of Might Guy. You have all heard his presentation on taijutsu at least once. What do you remember about him? All 3 Jonin made a face at the thought of the Lao Jonin. He is, That is, he dresses oddly. He is obviously skilled, but he seems to be focused on. Naruto couldn't get the words out. He glanced at Shino, who obligingly took up the description. He is loud and draws attention wherever he goes. He is known for being obsessed with life, the inner fire, and analogies of spring. He is a taijutsu specialist. He is currently a Jonin sensei with the Jinan team. Ibiki held up a hand to stop them. Look at what you just said. What do you notice? The boys thought for seconds before Naruto and Shikamaru got it. He is a well-known Jonin who has a major specialization, but what we notice is that he is goofy and loud. Naruto tapped his thigh. Also, Shikamaru commented. I noted his physical appearance first, and his skill set later. Ibiki let them work it out. He is not incapable at all, yet, the first impression he gives people is that he is a loud, overly romantic buffoon. I intellectually know that he is a master of taijutsu, and that isn't on par with Jonin like you, or Anko Mitarashi, but that is not the impression he gives. The grin Ibiki gave the Naro was sharp. Exactly. You see what I am getting at? I think so. By presenting a front, or act, you can influence how people react to you. Shino muttered. Naruto, you have experienced this. I want you to describe why and how you created your school persona. The blonde shifted and looked away. What, I guess. Ibiki had expected the reluctance. I experience lots of negative reactions to my real behavior, things like being sent out from class, or being verbally attacked. The boy bit his lip and powered through the tension. I started to act like an ignorant, loud kid after I saw another kid do something similar. I thought that if people noticed what I wanted to, and not the other things, they would leave me alone more. I downplayed my ability, and gave the impression that I didn't have manners, and didn't understand people and books sometimes. After I had the reputation for being in trouble, I could move around in places I shouldn't be without people really paying attention to what I was doing. People didn't notice that I could outrun Jonin as an 8-year-old, they just noted that I was in trouble again. Ibiki stopped him before the boy had to try to force out more details. He was already withdrawing enough as it was. Thank you. That is part of what a persona does. It also allows you to catch others off guard. You protect yourself slightly with it, and it can give you advantages. The Jonin paused to make sure the three boys were following him. I bring this up because you are all going to be working out a persona to cultivate. He met each of their eyes. You will have to think carefully about what you want your persona to do for you, and how you can use acting and presentation to accomplish that goal. A good persona will need to be something you can maintain for months on end without a break if necessary. You cannot simply choose a wild character and go with it. I'm sure Naruto can attest to it, but maintaining a facade wears on you. A good facade will not have lapses or glimpses of the real personality unless the individual intends to show it. Naruto shrugged slightly and voiced a question in an attempt at regaining his composure. When do you want us to use them? What do you mean? Shikamaru asked. Well, I mean, is the persona something for missions, around the village, or both? I used to act that way all the time, unless I was by myself, but that was because I wanted the village to see me that way. Do we need to have an advantage against the village? Ibiki approved quietly of the thought. To answer, the intention is for it to be used both in and out of the village. While it may be true that you shouldn't need to trick your fellow Konoha shinobi, the persona won't function as well if you only use it out on missions. It has to be natural and comfortable. Also, it will be ineffective if your comrades are surprised by it or can't interact normally with you on a mission. You also never let your guard down, even in the village. Threats can come from within just as easily as without. The Jonin stepped away. Take those packs and we will head to the tower and start thinking about what you might like to achieve with a persona. We will start working on them during or after our C rank. The Jinan loaded up the remaining supplies and shouldered their newly put together packs. Recap: Naruto and company are preparing for their first C rank mission. Ibiki has assigned them the task of creating fake personas for themselves, and the boys are working to come up with these. The Jonin stepped away then, signaling the end of the lesson. Take those packs and we will head to the tower and start thinking about what you might like to achieve with a persona. We will start working on them during or after our C rank. The Jinan loaded up the remaining supplies and shouldered their newly put together packs. Ibiki let his team think as he led them through the village to the Hokage tower. He knew that he was putting a lot on them all at once, but that was his intention. Seeing how they reacted under different types of stress would tell him what to work on going forward. As he still wasn't sure what to think of the secrets they were obviously keeping from him, this was the next best way he knew of to progress. At the moment, they were all quiet. Ibiki could tell that they were tired and thinking hard. The Jonin didn't mind. He was more accustomed to quiet, and after spending the majority of his time with criminals or as of late children, the relative reprieve was appreciated. The tower was a low steady hum of activity. The lower floors held administration offices. Chunin, Jinan and civilians went about their jobs with the drudgery that went with the territory. This was as far as Jinan teams usually went. The small desk in the back corner of the room was where most D ranks were issued. Ibiki knew his team knew the names of each of the Chunin who issued D-ranked missions by now. The secondary station for higher-ranked missions was on the top floor of the tower for security reasons. The Jonin directed them towards the arched doorway on the right that led to the stairs. The stairs to the second floor had a bored Chunin standing guard. Ibiki gave no indication that he was scrutinizing everything going on in the room as they walked in. Out of the corner of his eye, he noted his Jinan doing similar things to the unfamiliar area. Naruto was paying attention to entrances and exits and picking out the most threatening individuals in the room. Ibiki could tell that his instincts were spot on. The Jinan had picked out the off-duty Jonin and a retired shinobi that Ibiki knew to be a former Tondi enforcer. Shino had a few insects floating about giving him feedback on the active chakra in the room. Shikamaru was on the same page as Naruto, checking positions and noting people who caught his eye. Ibiki suppressed a hard grin. He knew plenty of Chunin and Jonin who let this kind of habit go when in the village. That his boys were maintaining vigilance made a tickle of satisfaction run down his spine. The third floor had a pair of Chunin guarding it, as this area was off-limits to anyone who was below Chunin unless accompanied by a higher-ranking individual. Again, the three Jinan stayed at attention. The fourth floor housed the Hokage's office and the mission desk. This floor had Anbu guarding it. Ibiki watched the reactions as each of the Jinan noted them. Shino and Shikamaru just seemed to stiffen and hold themselves more readily than before. Naruto though, his hackles rose. All higher-ranked shinobi have an edge to their chakra. Most, if not all, learn to control the aura, some even weaponize it. Anbu were some of the best at this skill. Ibiki couldn't detect them. He was aware of them, but their chakra was no more obtrusive than the Chunin downstairs. Naruto went from the general state of awareness that he shared with the other Jinan to a hyper-awareness almost instantly. Ibiki could feel his chakra prickling and sharpening to meet the subdued and controlled auras of the Anbu. The Jinan quickly noticed his own reaction and halted it, but now the Jonin was intrigued. He was aware that Naruto had good senses and reactions, but this was a faster and more extreme reaction than he had expected. It made Ibiki wonder how aware the boy had been of his Anbu minders as a child. The Jonin bit back a sigh and mentally filed the information in his ever-growing list of things to look into regarding his team. It was becoming a bit of a disturbing trend. Ignoring the Anbu and his students' reaction for now, he led the three Jinan up to the queue at the mission desk. There were only a handful of others picking up missions, mostly Chunin as that was the rank with the largest numbers at the moment. Once they reached the front of the short queue, the Chunin on duty gave them a glance and started fishing through the small pile of D ranks he had. The Tondi leader knew that all ranks took D-rank missions from time to time. Especially when a shinobi was recovering from an injury or chakra exhaustion. The simple missions were something to bide the time and keep busy. Ibiki held up a hand. Team Ibiki will be taking a C rank. The Chunin raised an eyebrow at them. That has to be cleared. Ibiki scowled and leveled the younger man with a cold stare. W with the Hokage first, he mumbled. Ibiki pulled out a small slip of yellow paper and slapped it down on the desk. A C rank, Chunin. The man gulped and glanced down at the paper for a split second. Just long enough to see the stamp of the Hokage, and then he was lifting up the basket of C ranks and sorting through them. There's a border patrol, a find and retrieve, escort to the land of snow. He looked up. Ibiki just stared. The Chunin flinched and dug deeper, obviously shaken by the scowl and Ibiki's presence. An escort to an outlier village in the land of fire. He held up the scroll with a hopeful look. Ibiki huffed and took it. The other man sagged with relief. The Jonin turned and led the boys back out of the tower. They went to a small diner and sat in the back area reserved for shinobi. Their booth was just big enough for the three Jinan to sit on one side. Ibiki ordered them a pot of tea and then laid out the mission scroll. You three read it over and give me a synopsis. The Jinan crowded around the scroll immediately. Naruto traced a finger down it as he read. Ibiki watched them go through twice and discuss the details between themselves. Once again, there was a strange dynamic between the three. They each had their own area where they shined, but they all contributed and fed off the others. That in and of itself wasn't the strange part. That would be the way that Naruto was quietly and subtly deferred to as the team's leader. He wasn't even sure the two clan heirs were aware of it. But if the blonde boy made a statement, the client wants to be escorted at a normal pace, see here, it says with regard to our stature. The other two accepted it and moved on to a new point. If Naruto frowned at a point and offered an opinion, the other two truly listened to it and most often went with what the other boy had decided. It wasn't like the way a fan would agree with their celebrity crush, or how a victim reacted to a bully. It was an example of deep trust. And that, in any shinobi, but especially one so young and bright, was hard to come by. Shikamaru was the de facto spokesman, as was common. Shino was the support, the backbone. He was what balanced Naruto's fast-paced leaps of logic with Shikamaru's excruciating details and meticulous planning. These were natural parts of team formation, but Ibiki most often found it in seasoned chunin and jonin. Anbu had even tighter working relationships. Ibiki would bet that these three would quickly develop that, once they saw combat and difficult missions together. It was truly a remarkable team he had. The jonin wondered how the other newly minted Jonin teams were faring. Finally, the boys sat down the scroll and looked at him. The client, Anaagi Koshiko, is a lesser noble from the Land of Fire. He and his party, which consists of 4 additional principals, are returning to their family seat in the north. They reside in a moderate palace in the village of Genohara. They wish to take a route that is easy from Konoha to Genohara. The desired departure date is 2 days from now. Shikamaru summed up. Ibiki nodded once. Good, and what details about the executions of this mission have you come up with? We will need to study the maps of that area and develop several routes and possible deviation points along them. Shino started, and then Naruto picked up the narrative. Ibiki was growing accustomed to his team's round-robin method of giving information. They seemed to pass information between each other like this quite well. After that, we should design possible strategies for the actual protection based on our skills and the nature and age of the principals. We will need to integrate the 2 sets of information as best as we can. Shikamaru went on. From what information we currently have, it would be best to take the main road for 6 miles, then diverge onto a side path going west. This will have the group moving towards the destination laterally, rather than directly. The side roads are less traveled, and the presence of enemies will be easier to note. These roads are still easily passable from what we know for civilians. Ibiki thought for a moment and nodded once. And the distribution of our team? They exchanged a glance and Shikamaru answered. We think it would be best to have Shino in front, Naruto to the left and me to the right, with you bringing up the rear. We would keep the principals in a central group, but not a close one. Why this arrangement? Ibiki could see the possible reasoning behind it, but he wanted to hear their logic. Shino can send out a few Kikaiku to scout, and with his glasses, it is difficult for people to see where he is focused. Naruto can use his sensing more peripherally, and can communicate well from a central position. I am more of a close-range fighter, so keeping me close to the principals is better than having me out front. You, as a jonin, are the most capable, and thus should be in a position that allows you a wider area to observe and move if need be. Thus the rear guard. Ibiki let himself smile at them slightly. The 3 boys relaxed a bit when they noted the expression. Though their sensei was austere and cool, they had come to recognize the slight smile as a sign of approval. All of your initial observations are well thought out. However, as you first mentioned, there is quite a bit of research you all should do before the party sets out. Knowing exactly where you are going and what is between here and there is critical. When you study the maps, also pay attention to the surrounding area. You can never know how a mission may shift at the drop of a knife. The jonin plucked the scroll up and glanced through it once. Another area where you should always find out as much as possible is the client themselves. Are these nobles well respected, dealing with a scandal, in disgrace, or fleeing from enemies? These are all factors to include when you plan. In some cases, the mission's client will be someone you have to be wary of, especially with more advanced missions. The possibility of other ninja villages being involved in the matter is something else to be wary of. The political climate between the rest of the hidden villages is wrought with hairpin triggers. The 3 Jonin nodded. Naruto hummed in thought and sipped at his cooling tea. How would we go about finding that kind of thing though? I mean, if we are here in the village, how would we gain access to such details? A good question, Naruto. For some missions, you can seek information from other Konoha shinobi. Routes and information on cities and villages are slower to change, so others who have been in those areas can offer accurate information. This can also apply to more well-known individuals. There is, for chunin and higher-ranked shinobi, access to the spy network reports. These are all in various levels of declassification, but all kinds of knowledge and information can be found. These are the best resources for in-village prep. For more complex missions, the team sent will have time to do all of their recon in the field. The time allowed differs based on the scope, scale, and parameters of the mission. Ibiki tapped the scroll with his gloved index finger. For the missions we take as a Jinan team, I will provide the needed information if it is not accessible to you. As Jinan, there will be fewer sources open to you and your peers. The three Jinan lost a slight bit of tension at this. Naruto hadn't been looking forward to sneaking into the archives to get access to information. Their little tests with Ibiki were more than enough, and he didn't like having to sneak around the village. Ibiki sat back and made eye contact with each of them. What is your opinion of a time frame for prep and briefing? Naruto had the first response. We should only need to run a few extra drills and make sure our packs are set up. We've been practicing this kind of thing lately, so there aren't new strategies to cover. Some rest and time to go over the routes and solidify plans with background information will be all the other prep we will need. Shino nodded. Logically, we will only need part of one day to cover all of that. Why? Because we are fairly cohesive already, and have set team formations in place. Those two things take the longest to achieve. Ibiki spared Shikamaru a glance to make sure he was in agreement before he stood. I agree. You assess the mission and your preparedness well. We will have tomorrow off, for me to clear up things at Tondi and gather intel. You three can rest and work on ideas for personas. The day after will be for a few more drills, and going over the protocols and a briefing. Dismissed. The Jinan stood together and took off. Naruto headed to the base without thought. His head was spinning through all kinds of ideas and thoughts. He was running through applications of seals on the mission when he registered passing through the barriers, closely followed by the other two. They gathered around on the grass to talk. Shikamaru took the opportunity to lay back and watch the clouds. He hadn't had the chance to do so in quite a while. The other two boys joined him. What? I wonder what we can reveal on the mission. Naruto grumbled, tearing at a blade of grass. Shino hummed, letting a few of his insects out to buzz lazily around the clearing. I too have wondered what we should do. There are issues with both options. Yeah, I mean, it'll be a bit troublesome to have to explain what all we've been doing if we get cornered about it. Who knows what a Jonin will do when faced with all the liberties we've been taking with our training. I know my dad gets pissed when the other Jonin do something way outside of their jurisdiction. Naruto huffed. I get that, believe me. I've had more than enough of teachers getting mad for learning, and of authority figures being jerks. I just don't know. I mean, Sensei seems quite different. But still, he can be scary. I also have no true way to gauge what we might have to reveal. Shino put in. There might be no need to do so, and if we needlessly complicate the mission, we will have lost an advantage for nothing. They sat for a while longer, tossing back and forth ideas for what could pass muster for extra study and what would be truly damning. The discussion went around and around, all of them playing devil's advocate for both sides. In the end, Naruto suggested that they try to get a little bit better idea of what to expect before they finalize their plans. We should see if we can get any information about the area and the political climate. I think maybe just outright asking at the archives might be the best bet. Sensei might find out, but if we are upfront with our questions, there shouldn't be any issues. If we are rebuffed, we can try other ways. Shikamaru sat up and brushed off his clothes. I guess it couldn't hurt. It would also give us a precedent if we ever need more info. Kamizuki Izuma was glad for a change from gate duty, and being assigned to cover the archive desk for the day was even better. He did wish he would have been able to visit Kotetsu in the hospital sooner, but he knew his best friend would be fine after a few days' rest. He glanced over the newest declassified report from the Dodesage and chuckled at some of the more detailed descriptions it included. The man's flair for dramatics was even present in coded reports. The proximity alarm went off second before the door across from his desk was pulled open. He glanced up, keeping a bored look on his face. He might love finding new information and discovering secrets, but other people didn't need to know that his curiosity included them. He wouldn't be able to spin the rumor mill with Genma if people knew how much he paid attention. He raised an eyebrow when three kids walked through the door. Anara, Aburame, and was that the QB kid? He hid his surprise to see the latter out of his normal orange jumpsuit. The more neutral clothes made him look older, he thought. Izuma recalled the many times he'd gone with Iruka to chase the kid down after a prank or a particularly important lesson that was skipped. He took a second look at the other two and was again surprised to recognize the two as the current clan heirs. Huh? What are three brand new Jinan doing here? It's been like 2 months or something since graduation. They can't be at a level where they need anything from the information archive. Weird. He watched them take stock of the library-like room. The only real difference from the regular Shinobi library was the much tighter security both inside and out in the smaller space. I wonder if their sensei sent them on a field trip to learn about how Konoha compiles data or something? He leaned back in his chair and waited for them to approach the desk. When the Nar kid, damn near a carbon copy of Shikaku, stepped forward, he was curious. He could see Inara wanting to be well informed. "Excuse me, Chunin-san, my team and I are preparing for a travel mission, and need maps of Fire Country and some current intel. Are there any 480B reports that we can access as Jinan? Or not?" Damn, what kind of Jinan even knows that there are forms for intel? Naruto, that was the blonde's name, he was pretty sure, continued. "Our time frame is loose, but departure is a hop away." Izumo had to focus on keeping his face straight. Seriously, the hell kind of 12-year-olds know that kind of stuff? Who is their teacher, and do they know that their kids are asking for access to detailed information in condensed reports? He watched the three of them and saw nothing but serious, calm body language. The Aburame boy was the most calm. Uzumaki was watching him closely back, but Izumo was sure that Jinan wouldn't be able to pick up any of his emotions or tells like a Jonin or some of the Chunin could. "Let me check what I have that is fully declassed. I doubt there will be much of the 480s, but I know a new map came in the other day that is available." He started flipping through a stack of papers on a clipboard while he talked. He already knew that Jinan couldn't read anything that was held in the archive unless they had special permission. He mostly wanted to fish for information. It was always best to look like you were trying to be helpful and distracted when fishing. People often didn't think much of what they said then. "So, your sensei's sending out the team on a C rank? Your teacher must be pretty confident. I bet they have Hokage, he'd take his team out on a C rank 2 months after getting them. It's not gonna be pretty. Everybody knows the copy nin is so skewed he doesn't realize what normal is. I would hope that the Hokage would put a stop to this kind of screw-up though." He glanced up. Naruto shrugged slightly, still watching the Chunin closely. Ibiki-sensei made sure it was a fairly basic one. "Oh, well, that might be. I thought Genma was screwing me when he said that Morino Ibiki had a Jinan team." "Huh, you boys learning anything interesting from him?" He flashed a slight grin as he asked, switching to dig through a drawer for a map. "Ma. We have drilled so many hostile enemy situations that our brains turn to mush." The Nara drawled, "Totally Shikaku's brat." Naruto grunted and added to it again. "Yeah, we passed out that one time, had a hell of a time the rest of training that day." "Okay now." Izumo didn't exactly like the sounds of that. He'd never had much reason to interact with the head of Tiny, but he knew the man was scary as hell and the best interrogator Konoha had. He wasn't sure how messed up being captured as a younger shinobi and then going to torture and investigation had left him, but from the sound of it, he wasn't adjusting to Jinan any better than Kakashi was. Hell, what kind of drill would include hostile enemy situations? Does that mean he runs them through simulated capture and torture like they do for infiltration mission personnel? And passing out during training and then continuing isn't exactly a good sign either. He pulled out a folded map and then got up to grab a second one from a shelf beside the desk. The Chunin chuckled slightly, turning his questions in a new direction. "Haha, sounds a bit rough. My sensei always had us up at an ungodly hour to run laps. I remember feeling like my legs would fall off." He chuckled again, softer, as if reminiscing. Baby Nara snorted and shrugged. 5 isn't too bad. We usually finish training in time for a late meal. The kata drills can be brutal though." The silent Aburame finally added his own 2 Ryo. "Logically taijutsu is best done in spars, this you know." Well, that didn't sound any better. What could possibly get a Nara up at 5 a.m. besides Morino Ibiki threatening them? He thought. "My team always had to stop for lunch. We didn't start quite that early though, so we had some more to do after." He put the file of maps, which he knew were of the Land of Waves, back on the shelf. His gut was screaming that something was off with his team and he needed more information. "Ah, we stopped for a quick lunch too," Naruto commented. Izumo smiled and bent to get another file. "What time do you finish?" Shikamaru sighed in the way that only a teen could. "After all our morning drills and training, we have D ranks, so usually around 7 or so?" He glanced at the other 2 for confirmation. Izumo pulled out the right map to cover his shock. "Kata and drills, then jutsu, sparring, then launch, more jutsu and drills, then missions, it usually takes that long." Shino nodded once. A 12-hour day with training and missions was brutal. He didn't know many Chunin that could keep up with that kind of schedule. Jutsu practice took a lot of energy, and if he was reading it right and the kids sparred against Hibiki, there was no way they weren't run absolutely ragged. That combined with the out-of-place knowledge of protocols and higher-level information had him wondering how the grim Jonin was treating the children. He handed them the maps. His sudden concern for their care under Iviki was carefully locked away. "Here's those maps. I'm afraid the reports we have aren't declassified to a non-access level." The boys took the maps and Shikamaru shrugged. "That's fine. These will help." The trio took a spot at the single table and pored over the maps. They sat close together and he saw Naruto taking what looked like careful notes. The travel route should be the Jonin's job. Why are the three of them even working on planning it? Is Morino expecting them to be able to run the mission? Quite perturbed now, the Chunin kept an eye on them until they returned the maps over 2 hours later. Naruto flipped through his notes on the possible routes back at their base. They had a small spread of snacks laid out on the table. Shino had turned out to be a fair cook, and he'd made a selection of onigiri and some taiyaki for them in the tiny kitchen. "I wonder what was bothering the Chunin at the archive," he commented as he added a few new modifications to their map. Shino hummed as he ate. "I do not know. Logically, I suppose Fusionon come there for information." "Why?" "Because they rely on their teachers for any kind of information. Perhaps we confused him with our schedule. I did not think to distinguish that some of that training is independent." Shikamaru yawned. "Yeah, I might have thrown him off when I mentioned passing out too. I mean, Naruto does that all the time here, but with the Ninetales, he recovers just fine and we can keep going. Trying his seals that once was definitely not one of our finer moments though." Naruto smirked slightly, looking up from the map. "I told you to be careful. It isn't my fault you don't listen." Shino huffed and poked at him with his fork. "I would like to change focuses for the rest of the evening," he announced. Shikamaru leaned back, tipping his chair on 2 legs. "What's up?" He idly munched on one of the rice balls. "I would like to work on your developed personas." "Why?" "Because I feel that this will be difficult for us." Naruto nodded. "Yeah, I mean I pretended to be a stupid troublemaker for years. It's hard to keep up something like that. Sensei said that we need to be able to stick with them for long periods of time, so I was thinking about what could be easy to pretend and what would wear me down." The Nara hummed. "I get that. I've been tossing around ideas, but I don't think I can decide without trying them for at least a little while." Naruto nodded. "Yeah, I think, in retrospect, it wasn't a good idea for me to do what I did. We should try out a few ideas, or maybe ask Sensei before we really try things out." Shino leaned forward and pushed up his glasses. "What do you think of the idea as a whole?" Shikamaru picked at his sleeve for a moment. He had to word his thoughts carefully. "I think that it makes sense, from a tactical point of view. If an enemy doesn't know what a unit is, they cannot counter as effectively. But, I don't know about the idea of putting up that front for the village. I get why it is helpful, I know my dad does it to some extent. He always sounds lazy and a leadback, but you can't make Jonin commander if you don't take any initiative. But, it feels disloyal to pretend to our peers and comrades. I know. That is part of why I brought it up. Logically, it will be hardest to keep up a facade for our friends and fellow villagers. I do not want to destroy chances for friendships or working relationships." But he trailed off. They all knew they would be following through on the project. They were all intelligent enough and dedicated to improving themselves. This wasn't something they could just ignore, especially when their teacher had directly tasked them with it. The next day was spent at the base. Naruto worked to make almost a dozen storage and compression scrolls with security measures worked into the matrices. Shikamaru packed them with supplies. Each boy would have a set with food, clothes, a light tent and sleeping bag, one with basic medical supplies, and one with weapons and gear. The other was left empty in case they came across something on the mission that required storage. Naruto also went through and made stacks of seal tags. He favored the flashbang, explosion, and sleeping gas ones, as they were most familiar with using these in team formations. He had a few others for himself as well. Shino mostly rested and reviewed the maps. When they returned to their homes, each boy was nervous and just a little bit excited. C ranks were a gauge of their development, a sign that they were truly ninja. That didn't diminish the possible dangers that came with real missions though, and each boy had read and studied enough past missions to know that one could never fully anticipate what would happen out in the field. C ranks were notorious for either being simple, or disasters. Only time would tell what theirs would be. That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.